Hopefully you all will enjoy this little bit of fan art before we get into the video itself. All of these are fan art pieces that have been submitted on the Discord over the years, and hopefully you all will enjoy. Well, now that the Fallout decks are out and everybody's been building more and more commanders based on the Fallout commanders, there is one that stuck out to me as a ridiculously flexible commander who can be part of a Super Friends package. He can be part of a just multiple types of Typal decks. He can be part of damn near anything he wants. He can be an Infect commander. He can be a Burn commander. He can be a Mill commander. So I want to introduce you all to probably a card you all already know about. This is the Wise Mothman. So, he is a Sultai commander, Sultai and 1 colorless. He's got flying. When he enters the battlefield, everybody gets a rad counter. And when 1 or more non-land cards are milled, you can then put a 1/1 counter on each of up to X target creatures, where X is the number of non-land cards milled this way. Now, I've seen some people play this card incorrectly, where the number of non-land cards milled ends up being the amount of counters they put on Mothman. That's not how he works. Mothman spreads the counters out, go wide. He does not stack them up, go tall. Now, granted, this does mean that Mothman can get about 4 counters every turn cycle, because it's for every single player. So he still can go tall. It's just, read his ability. I know that I've gotten rulings wrong on videos before, but I will hammer in, because at my LGS, I've seen this happen with multiple people playing the card wrong. And if you just read him, he is one of the few cards left in Magic the Gathering where reading his card does actually explain his card. But I looked at this effect, and we need to talk about how rad counters work in Magic real quick to understand what we're going to be doing. So the way a rad counter works is you throw a rad counter on somebody, and then when their upkeep begins, after they draw, they mill a number of cards equal to the rad counters they have. And for every non-land card they mill, they will burn for 1 life. And then after they burn, you then take rad counters away based on the amount of life they burned, or the amount of non-land cards that were taken away from them. This is a very, 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 very powerful effect that, if you are using it correctly, will cause people to lose valuable resources, burn through their deck itself. It can let you do a mill strategy. It can let you burn somebody to death. And it can enable a very loved archetype of cards that I'm going to go ahead and talk about today. We're going to be building this as a rogue tribal deck. We are making a Typal deck based on rogues. And the reason I thought about this is there's a rogue deck that I got introduced to a long time ago when we got the precon for it, Anowon the Rootin' Thief. And Anowon is a fantastic rogue. He's a great rogue commander, but he's missing something. He himself adds a little bit of mill and then a draw power and lording and all kinds of stuff to rogues. But it's my favorite color to play in Magic the Gathering is green, so he doesn't have it. He just does not have green. So let's fix that problem by stapling green onto him and just making Wise Mothman the leader of the deck. But let's go ahead and talk about what our strategy is going to be. Because rogues tend to be low to the ground, go wide, get in their types of cards in Magic, and Wise Mothman is an evasive go-wide commander, our strategy is going to be putting a bunch of rogues that are able to dodge things, that are able to be either flying or unblockable or have Skulk or have Shadow, just hard cards to block, and we are going to attack our opponents on multiple fronts. They're going to be taking combat damage from a ton of rogues, they're going to be taking burn damage from the rad counters, they're going to be taking burn damage from milling cards in general, they are going to be taking commander damage from Wise Mothman as he stacks up. There's going to be so many avenues of potential win cons for us while we're using this deck that it's going to be hard for our opponents to handle us without just repeatedly smacking us with board wipes. If only we had access to white to protect ourselves with phasing. But let's go ahead and talk about how we are going to be ramping into our strategies first, and then we'll get into more of the meat of the deck. So, In the ramp section, we have Convert. Because this is a deck that has the ability to proliferate, as rad counters are counters we can interact with the proliferate mechanic, I did want to add some infect in here as well, because this will add another ticking time bomb. Our opponent's decks are ticking down, our opponent's life points are ticking down, our board is getting bigger, our commander is hitting with command damage, and we have infect damage that is being added into the mix as well. But I didn't want to add so much infect that it felt oppressive, so there's only a couple of cards that are in here. But when we talk about upgrades, you'll see some of the other things that we could possibly do during this. But Convert has Toxic. We can pay 2 life and tap it to add a mana of any color. Honored Heirloom is the rainbow rock that lets us tell everybody's graveyards that they are our stuff to mess with, not theirs. Reanimator players have to be made honest. Dreamscape Artist is a 2-mana spell shaper that can make you discard a card and then get rid of a land to get 2 basic lands untapped out of your deck. Font of Fertility is basically Wayfarer's Bauble, but for green. Search for Tomorrow can get any land out of your deck untapped with basic land. Growth Spiral can let you draw a card at instant speed and put a land from your hand onto the battlefield. Farhaven Elf gets a basic land out and it comes into play tapped, but the elf is, of course, a creature. We have a 39 creature deck. We are creature heavy. We want to be able to have a lot of targets to throw the Mothman's counters onto. Then we have Rampant Growth. Search your library for a basic land, put it into the battlefield tapped. Then we have Arcane Signet to tap for any color that our deck might need. We also want to make sure that we are keeping our opponent's cards at bay throughout our deck. So we have an 11-card removal and interaction package. And this package was larger, and then I went rogues, and then it wasn't able to be larger. So we begin with Carnivorous Canopy. Blow up an artifact or enchantment. If it's a small one like a Soul Ring, we proliferate, which of course means more rad counters, more infect counters, more 1/1 counters on our board. Negate can counter any non-creature spell. Return to Nature can blow up an artifact, enchantment, or exile a card from somebody's graveyard at instant speed. So if somebody casts Reanimate, we can just return to Nature the card, and then it's gone. Reject Imperfection can counter a spell. If its mana value is 3 or less, we then proliferate. Resculpt can exile any artifact or creature and then give them a useless token in replacement. Smell Fear can proliferate and then make our Mothman, who's probably going to be the biggest thing on the board, fight any creature on the board. And if you start upgrading the deck and adding in some of the Death Touch rogues, then letting those rogues fight things is also a very, very fun way to just make cards trade up. Feed the Swarm, blow up any target creature or enchantment an opponent controls, lose life equal to its mana value. Canker Bloom can blow up an artifact or enchantment or proliferate for us. Rise of the Witch King, everybody sacrifices a creature, then we get a permanent from our graveyard to the battlefield. Serum Snare, return any non-land permanent to its owner's hand at instant speed if it had mana value 3 or less, proliferate, and then Drown in the Lock, another counter spell that can counter anything with converted mana cost less than or equal to the number of cards in its controller's graveyard. We're milling them, so this card will be live often. Or we can blow up any creature with converted mana cost less than or equal to the number of cards in their graveyard. So it's a kill spell or a counter spell. It just depends on what you want it to be that day. Now, the next thing, the next bare bones thing we need the deck to be able to do is draw cards so that we have access to all of our stuff, because it is very, very important when you are playing a deck to make sure that you can get cards into your hands that you can actually play. I don't know how many times I've seen people be like, my deck can draw, I put Heuristic Study in it, and like, yeah. And then somebody cast a Nature's Claim, and now you don't have Heuristic Study, and how's your deck drawing now? Like, just don't rely on those cards. Please put adequate draw engines in your decks. Anyway, Dragonborn Looter is a rogue where you can pay 1 and tap it, draw a card and discard a card. Merfolk Looter is a rogue where we can tap it to draw a card and discard a card. Vivisurgent's Insight will draw us 3 cards and proliferate for us. Audacious Thief is a rogue that makes us lose a life and draw a card every time it swings. Reconnaissance Mission means anytime one of our rogues make contact with a person, we will draw a card. Military Intelligence, when we swing with 2 or more of our creatures, we'll draw a card. Tezzeret's Gambit will proliferate all of our counters and draw us 2 cards. Ezri Stalker of Spear will proliferate twice if we pay 3 alongside him, and every time we proliferate, we will draw a card. And then we have Anowon, the Ruin Thief, the original commander for the Rogues Precon itself. Other rogues we control get +1/+1, and whenever one or more rogues we control deal combat damage to a player, they mill a card for each 1 damage dealt to them, which means he has perfect synergy with Mothman. Mothman makes the rogues bigger, and Anowon makes people mill as a result. If they mill at least 1 creature card, you draw a card. This means Anowon can draw us 3 cards every turn cycle, so long as the creatures are landing their shots on our opponents. But speaking of mill, mill is not the only way we want to kill people. We want them to lose via either infect or commander damage or mill or burn damage. We want to be able to hit them on all of those fronts as possible. So we have 2 cards to help our burn package here, beginning with Sir Conrad the Grin. Anytime another creature dies, or a creature is put into a graveyard from anywhere other than the battlefield, or a creature card leaves our graveyard, Conrad will deal 1 damage to each opponent. That means not only are people burning for 1 damage every time they mill a non-land card, if that non-land card happens to be a creature, they take everyone down with them. Conrad and rad counters are a match made in hell, and he's got a budget boy next to him in Dreadhound. When he enters the battlefield, mill 3 cards. Whenever a creature dies or a creature is put into a graveyard from the library, each opponent loses 1 life. Dreadhound is a weaker Sir Conrad, but he does the same amount of work 9 times out of 10 in this deck. Whether they are milling because of Mothman, whether they are milling because of Anowon, whether they are milling because of our other mill type effects, Dreadhound and Sir Conrad will be burning them to death as the game goes on. However, we also want to be proliferating our counters on cards. This makes people mill for more, this makes people burn for more, this makes people take more combat damage, and of course I've shown that there's a lot of cards in the deck that do proliferate already, but we also have a 4-card proliferate package, beginning with Tainted Observer. This is one of our other ways of getting infect counters onto players and starting the ticking clock that is their life. The Tainted Observer has flying and toxic 1, so if it punches somebody, they will get a poison counter. At 10 poison counters, they lose. Whenever another creature you control enters the battlefield, you may pay 2, and if you do, proliferate. The average mana cost of this deck is like 2.1, so Tainted Observer is going to come down, and we're going to play a rogue on the next turn that costs like 1 or 2, and then proliferate. And most of our rogues cost 1 or 2, so it will be very easy to get Tainted Observer to work for us. Contagion Clasp. When it enters the battlefield, put a 1/1 negative counter on a creature. We can use this to either start proliferating to kill somebody's commander, or we can kill a mana dork with this. But if we pay 4 and tap it, we get to proliferate, which is just kind of perfect. Vexing Rad Gull. When it deals combat damage to a player, they get 2 rad counters. But if they already have rad counters, then it proliferates instead. And then we have the Thrumming Bird. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, we proliferate. Just more and more ways of making sure that the counters on our opponents will keep stacking up as the game goes on. And Thrumming Bird happens to be a flyer, so it's evasive like all of our rogues, which makes it completely perfect for what our deck is trying to do. But now we need to get to the important part of the deck. This is the 22-card Go Wide Rogues package. And I want to go ahead and say that there's a rogue that I almost added to the deck, but budget did not allow for it. But let's go ahead and talk. I'll talk about that when we get to the upgrade section. Let's go ahead and talk about Looter Ilkor, the first rogue on the list, and probably one of the best ones in our deck, actually. 1/1 rogue with Shadow. He can't block, but he also can't be blocked unless another creature has Shadow. And if it deals damage to opponent, draw a card and discard a card. Perfect. He's everything we want him to be. Merfolk Spy has Island Walk, and if it deals combat damage to a player, they reveal a card at random from our hand. We get information through the game, and it's a 1-mana 1/1 rogue. All we have to do is punch the blue player. Night Veil Sprite. Whenever it attacks, we get the Surveil 1, which can trigger our Sir Conrad and our Dreadhound, but also it's just a flying fairy rogue for 2 mana. Perfect. Vedalken Infiltrator. You've probably seen this in your sleep paralysis. This is your sleep paralysis demon. If it isn't, it is now. But the Vedalken Infiltrator, with his various appendages used to infiltrate your butt, can't be blocked, has a 2 mana cost, and if we have 3 or more artifacts, he gets +1/+0. That's not going to happen too terribly much because we're not artifact heavy. We've only got 6 in the deck, but it is there. Nightshade Stinger, 1 mana for a 1/1 fairy rogue. It can't block or can't be blocked except by flyers. Network Disruptor. When it enters the battlefield, tap target permanent. Erakoa Sneak. Dungeons are in this deck, Fathermucker. Erakoa Sneak. When it enters the battlefield, you take the initiative. That, of course, puts you in the Undercity, giving you a basic land. And then, of course, every single upkeep we get to keep it, or every single time that we get to steal the initiative from another player, we get to go further into the Undercity until we get to that absolutely broken final room, where we get to look at the top 10 cards of our deck and just get a creature out of it and give it a bunch of 1/1 counters. So, Ericoa Sneak is a rogue. And I would not have put the initiative in this deck if it were not for the fact that it's a rogue. It almost made me put a bunch of other stuff that gives the initiative in the deck, but I did everything in my power to stop myself. It only has this one way of going into the dungeon, as far as I remember. I'm so sorry. Whirler Rogue. It is a 4-mana 2/2 rogue, but it makes 2 colorless Thopter tokens with flying. We can also tap 2 untapped artifacts we control to make target creature unblockable for a turn, which is super cool for our commander. Silahana Ledgewalker is a rogue that can't be blocked except by flyers and has hexproof. Fairy Vandal is a rogue that can come into play at flash speed, and anytime you draw your second card each turn, put a 1/1 counter on Fairy Vandal. This can actually get very big, very quick in our deck. Fairy Miscreant. It's got flying, it's a 1-mana 1/1, and when it enters the battlefield, if you control another card with the same name, draw a card. If we went with the Clones package, this would be useful. Merfolk Windrobber, flying, 1/1, 4/1, and we can sack it to draw a card. If it deals combat damage to a player, they mill a card. Grey Harbor Merfolk can't be blocked, and it gets +2/+0 if our commander is out. So it's a 2-mana 2/3 that can't be blocked. That's a really good return on investment. Cridle of Baldur's Gate, a 2-mana 1/3 that if it deals combat damage to a player, they lose a life, mill a card, then you gain a life, scry 1, and every time you attack, you may pay 2, and if you do, target creature can't be blocked this turn. We just use this to make Mothman unblockable in case somebody's playing dragons or some shit. Quickling, a flash flying fairy rogue. When it enters the battlefield, we can then bounce any card to our hand, creature to our hand, and it has to sacrifice itself if we don't. Quickling is here so that if our opponent tries to kill Mothman and we don't want to pay commander tax on it, we just throw Quickling out to protect our commander very quickly. Mocking Sprite makes all of our instants and sorceries, of which the deck has 18, cost 1 less to cast. It's also a 2/1 flying fairy. Soaring Thought Thief is a flash flying rogue. As long as your opponent has 8 or more cards in their graveyard, it will lord 1/0 to all rogues you control, and if one rogue attacks, each opponent will mill 2 cards. With the amount of rogues in our deck, this can get out of hand very, very quickly. Zareth Sen the Trickster. It's a rogue that you can pay 5 for it, but let's be honest, you're paying 4 for it. It's got Rogue Ninjutsu. Return an unblocked rogue to your hand, put it on the battlefield, attacking the same person, and if it deals combat damage to that person, put any permanent card from their graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. Zareth Sen is a house. I adore this card. Zareth Sen, if he could be a commander, I would love him, but his effect only works from the hand, so he really doesn't do very well in the command zone. But yeah, no, he's perfect for this kind of deck. Just takes a rogue that you don't care about at the moment, puts it back in your hand, boom, all the rad counter milling that you've been taking, I'm just going to steal something from your grave. It's mine now. And you can use Quickling to throw it back to your hand so that you can get that effect again later if you want to make sure that he dodges things like board wipes. Ravenloft Adventurer. I lied, there are more rogues that have the initiative. Ravenloft Adventurer gives our opponents the satisfying feeling of being locked under a Stone of Eric. All of their creatures, if they die, we exile them instead with hit counters on them. When Ravenloft Adventurer enters the battlefield, we take the initiative. If it attacks, if we've completed a dungeon, the defending player will lose 1 life for every card they own with a hit counter on it. Just sort of an alternate win con, but it's also a rogue that goes into the dungeon, so you know I had to put it in. I'm sorry for lying to all of you. Slitherblade, a 1-mana 1/1 Naga rogue. It can't be blocked. It's quite literally perfect. Nighthawk Scavenger, a vampire rogue that has flying, death touch, and lifelink, and its power is equal to 1 plus the number of card types among cards in our opponent's graveyards. Holy crap, this card is amazing. I adore effects like this. This can keep our life nice and steady. This can trade up with anything in the game, even if it has evasion. Wow, I studied through that. It's amazing that I don't do these with a script. Anyway, The Nighthawk Avenger, also, because it can gain 1 power for every card type in our opponent's graveyards, we basically have a reverse Tarmogoyf that's just getting bigger and bigger the longer the game goes. This card is fantastic. Una's Blackguard, it's a fairy rogue with flying, and each other rogue creature you control enters the battlefield with a 1/1 counter, which means our Proliferate will automatically see use, even if the rad counters are not flowing yet. And whenever a creature we control with a 1/1 counter deals combat damage to a player, they discard a card. We can empty out our opponent's hands with Una's Blackguard. It's fantastic. And then we have one more honorary one in the Lieges and Lords section of the deck, the Glen Elendra Liege. Now, Glen Elendra Liege is not a rogue, but it is a flying fairy knight, costs 4 mana, and it gives all of our blue creatures and black creatures +1/+1. And if they happen to be blue and black, it gives it +2/+2. Our commander's blue and black, so it's getting +2/+2 from that. So that is the bulk of what our deck is trying to do. It's trying to get these rogues out, stack their powers up, beat people just to a fine patty with those effects. But we are milling ourselves a lot, so we do need ways to make sure we can recur our own cards. And to do so, we have 2 recursion and reanimation cards in the deck, because we are not a reanimation deck, and we don't benefit from reanimation that much, because none of our cards cost enough mana for the cheating out effects of reanimation to really help us. But Timeless Witness is my pick for one of our recursion cards, because if it enters the battlefield, we can return a card from our graveyard to our hand, but we can eternalize it from the graveyard, which will banish it and then create a token copy of it on the board. I like Timeless Witness in decks like this because it means that even if this gets milled by our own shenanigans, it still is functional. Speaking of milling ourselves, Revival Experiment is a haymaker of a card for every permanent type. So for a creature, for an artifact, for an enchantment, and for a land, and for a battle if we had one, we can return up to one of those cards onto the battlefield. Then we lose 3 life. Each card returned this way. So we're going to lose 12 life, we're going to get a land back, we're going to get a creature back, we're going to get an artifact on the board, and we're going to get an enchantment on the board that we milled out during the game. Revival Experiment is, if it's in your graveyard, it should be the first thing Timeless Witness grabs, because it is going to do far more for pulling you back into the game than just about anything else is. It is a wonderful, wonderful card. And then finally, we have the board wipes section of the deck. I tried to make sure that the board wipes in this deck were asymmetrical. So Necromantic Selection blows up everything, and then we revive a creature that was blown up. So basically, we're just going to get back Mothman during that, which will also trigger Mothman's ETB of giving people rad counters. And then in Garrick's Wake, we are a green deck, so the likelihood we'll be able to scale up to this style of board wipe is fairly high, but it blows up all creatures we don't control and all planeswalkers we don't control, which is kind of perfect for us because we are a go-wide deck. We are already susceptible to board wipes, and we don't want to board wipe ourselves, so I've chosen ones that either let us keep our commander or let us keep everything else. Which leaves us to the land section of the deck. Now that I've made an entire video on lands, and now that I've got a bunch of videos planned for lands, I'm tired of looking at this section, but we got to talk about it anyway. 8 forests, 5 swamps, and 8 islands with our dual lands. We have a 9-card dual land section. Viridescent Bog. Oh, I'm so happy that these are a thing now. Filter lands are in enemy colors, and I could not be happier. Viridescent Bog is a blue or a black-green filter land to go with our Darkwater Catacombs, which is a black-blue filter land. Choked Estuary, Vine Glimmer Snarl, and Necroblossom Snarl are all reveal lands. Tainted Wood and Tainted Isle are our lands that care about the swamps in our deck. Fetid Pools is a cycling land, and I've chosen to keep it because our deck has so many cards in it that care about very, very little lands. There are some times where we don't need the land drop from Fetid Pools, we just cycle it away. Sunken Hollow, if we have 2 or more basic lands, it will come into play untapped as well. So it is just kind of perfect for our kind of deck. Then we have our 4 fetching lands: Shire Terrace, Terramorphic Expanse, Promising Vein, and Evolving Wilds, all just to get whichever land type we need. Probably get Swamp as early as you can in the game so that cards like the Tainted Isle and Tainted Wood will be online. And then in our Omni land section, a Command Tower and an Exotic Orchard. And that puts us almost right up to the ass end of our deck's budget. And that is our Mothman deck. We're going wide, we've got Infect, we've got ways of just hurting people in a very, very large variety of ways. But there are some angles you can take the deck that I was planning on taking it. There was another win con I was planning on throwing in the deck as well that I almost did because of one particular creature, Nine Fingers Keen. Let's talk about some upgrades. So, Nine Fingers Keen is a human rogue with Ward, Pay 9 life, and if it deals combat damage to a player, look at the top 9 cards of your library, put a gate from them on the battlefield, then if you have 9 or more gates, put the rest into your hand. She is a house, and I almost made this deck a gates deck by putting an Open the Gates District Guide, Navigation Orb, Gate Creeper Vine, as well as Explore the Underdark and Circuitous Route, because Explore the Underdark gave me another way to do the initiative. So, you know, I was almost tempted on that idea alone. But by adding in a gates base, this would have given us access to one more win condition, and that is the Maze's End win condition. So the idea of trying to like put so many different angles of winning in the game that no matter how you attacked the deck, it had ways of hitting you, was really appealing to me. The problem is that in this color combination, we've only got access to like 12-ish gates, and if we're milling our gates away, I would have had to have put a lot more recursion in the deck, specifically for lands, which, you know, if you want to upgrade the deck, then putting in a Crucible of Worlds and a Conduit of Worlds would not hurt, because those will let you get those gates that you milled onto the battlefield. If you choose to get the gate package in, because Nine Fingers Keen is a wonderful lieutenant, then Crucible and Conduit of Worlds must go in your deck, guaranteed. There's also another rogue that I avoided putting in the deck because I had to make the budget cut, but Blighted Agent is a rogue. It has Infect. It would have given us another way to stack Infect on people and in our decks tribe. That would have been fantastic. I also cut a lot of removal and interaction from the deck. I wanted to have Saruman's Trickery in because having the ability to amass an orc just gave us another thing to throw a counter on. Fuel for the Cause being a counter spell that can proliferate with us was just something I really wanted to have as well. But ultimately, I did not end up going with that particular route. I also wanted to put the other two lieges in because I really like completed cycles, but as you can see, they're both like $1, so they couldn't make it into the deck. I also wanted to put another side win con of Glaive of the Guild Pact in, just to make Mothman hit for bigger numbers. Like, just going, yeah, no, I have 10 gates on the board. I don't have Maze's End yet, but I have a sword, and my bug has a sword. Hope that's okay. But if you are upgrading this deck, one of the first things I would go for is Changeling Outcast. I did not put it in this one because it is 50 cents and would have broken our budget, which, you know, $15 deck. You have to be kind of careful. But cards like Changeling Outcast, it is a rogue. It can't be blocked. It's literally perfect for what our deck is trying to do. And you could also put Scheming Aspirant in. Whenever you proliferate, each opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. Kind of just a perfect card here. But in the removal and interaction section, I would add a Hagra Mauling because I like MDFCs and they do a lot of work for us. Other than that, removal and interaction, just getting some better counter spells can help, making sure that you're not reliant on just the 3-mana ones. Even though it does have Proliferate attached to it, getting a regular counter spell or a Wash Away can help a ton. On top of that, we're in black. Cards like Bitter Triumph, Murderous Rider, they can do work as well. As for our ramp section, this is probably the most gimped section of the entire deck. The rogue section's basically fine, but here, if you are upgrading the deck, Font of Fertility and Wayfarer's Bauble probably don't need to be here. Wayfarer's Bauble's, it's okay to stay because it can come out when we don't have green mana. But, like, the Myrrh Convert should be an Ornithopter of Paradise. The Dreamscape Artist, instead of being this, should be just a Nature's Lore. Font of Fertility wants to be a Farseek. Growth Spiral wants to be a 3 Visits. Like, you want the low to the ground, get any land out of the deck type of effects. And as you're upgrading the deck, you obviously should have the typed lands put in as well, which means Farhaven Elf would end up turning into a Wood Elves as you upgraded the deck. Proliferate section, I probably wouldn't change that much. I showed the stuff that proliferates in the other section, like the card that says, when you proliferate, everybody burns for 2. So that's what I would just keep that as it is. It's hard to add in a ton of just straight proliferate that doesn't have other synergies with the deck. As for the draw section, I would take the Dragonborn Looter, and I would swap it for a Bident of Thassa. If you go up to a Coastal Piracy and a Bident of Thassa in here, as opposed to having the Dragonborn Looter and probably the Vivisurgent's Insight, then you're going to have a much more stable draw package, and you might end up incentivizing yourself to chuck an Elixir of Immortality in here as you upgrade the deck. As for the burn section, we basically have the 2 best cards in this section for what they do. Sir Conrad is like literally the GOAT of Millburn, but as far as board wipes, you could actually go up. You could add an Ezre's Predation, the fight board wipe, or you could add in a Plague Wind as a 3rd asymmetric board wipe to benefit from the fact that we do have green and we do have the mana ramp in the deck. But with all that said, those are the angles I would take it if I was upgrading it. This is a very, very fun deck to mess around with. I hope you guys enjoy it. If you guys have already been trying to tinker with MothMan to figure out what angle you want to go with it, I hope this helped out a little bit. I hope you enjoy this, and please let me know what decks you want me to do in the future, and let me know how you felt about this one in the comments section below. With that all said, though, thank you all for watching. I appreciate every single one of you, and insert end of video tagline here. Hey, I just quickly want to give a thank you to all of my wonderful patrons who keep this show running. YouTube and Twitch are a pretty bumpy ride at the best of times, and the stability a Patreon provides me is worth more than I can say here. I'd also like to thank each and every one of my $20 and up patrons here, and they would be Red Joker, Britzkrieg, Cameron, Dren, Jemshin, Smiling DM, Poundini, Mabbity Babbity, Naomi, Isaac, Agamotto, Jordan, Ravi, Giuni, Kiratorian, Prisma, all of you, I'm not saying that part, and Starlight. And finally, thank you to everyone else that helps keep this channel alive. While you're here, why not check out another video? And thank you for watching.